Hey guys, so I know that many of you are wondering what my whole story is about languages. I know that Flashitizer, I think that's your name, your YouTube name, asked me what my story was for ASL, American Sign Language, and I thought that that was a good question because I know a lot of my viewers are wondering like how did Spanish happen, how did sign language happen, what about Korean, and so I wanted to talk about my whole language story. So the way this whole language thing started was when I was little. Growing up, my friends were Mexican, and they were from different parts of Mexico, or they were Mexican American, or either other parts of Spanish-speaking countries. And um, so, growing up, by the second and third grade, pretty much all of my friends were Spanish-speaking. I mostly hung out with people who spoke Spanish, and there was Spanish being spoken around me all the time. And by the fourth grade, I could understand most of it, and I didn't realize it until some of my friends were talking about me, and then I was like, wait a minute, I know what you're saying. And they didn't believe me, and I was like, no, I know what you're saying. You said this. And then they're like, oh, she understands what we're saying. So that was like the very beginning of my realization of the whole languages and how I can understand something so easily, you know? And I was a child. When you're a child, you're like a sponge. You can soak up languages like very fast if you're surrounded by it. Some people don't though, because there are lots of people who have hung out with Spanish-speaking friends and still never picked up the language. So even that was the beginning of my realization of my gift for languages. So when I was I don't know what grade I was in, maybe the sixth grade. I just remember I slept on the couch for some reason, and before going to sleep, I prayed to God before I went to sleep. Just this one time, I asked God to that when I wake up, to give me the gift of being able to speak any language, one language, and I think it was Spanish that I was praying about, but I remember asking God to let me learn a language very easily, like very quick. To pretty much, I was little, and I was just asking God, when I wake up, let me understand and be able to speak a language. So I was really expecting to wake up and be like, I can speak this language, and I can't say that it happened that way, but I really do think that God heard my prayer, and He really, not just in that moment, but throughout my life so far, He's been answering that prayer, because ever since then I've been able to pick up languages very easily and understand them and learn them and get a grasp of them. Even if I can't get it completely, I have a good understanding of languages and to be the gift of picking them up. So Spanish was my second language, and growing up I didn't want to speak it. I was not ashamed, but I was kind of embarrassed and worried that my words wouldn't come out right, or that I would say something wrong, and that people would laugh at me or make fun of me. And so in high school I started Spanish classes, and freshman year of high school I started Spanish class, and it was super easy. There were things that I already knew, and the thing is, I was getting really good grades in my Spanish class, while Spanish speakers were not, because they thought, oh, I know everything. But see, Spanish speakers, just like English speakers, know they know how to speak the language, but they don't know the reasons they're saying those things. They don't know the grammar. They don't know why, you know? You just know how to say it. And sometimes people ask you, well, how come you can say this and you can't say this? And you just say, oh, you just can't. You know, like that's how we explain things, but that's not true. There's grammar that goes behind it, and those Spanish speakers don't know the grammar, or the reasons you put certain things before other things, and you just know you say it this way. So I was already understanding how you build the sentences and the reasons and the ways behind the construction of language and Spanish. And so by senior year of high school, they entered me into what was it? They entered me into AP Spanish, and I was still embarrassed about speaking it, and I was surrounded by complete like Spanish speakers, Hispanohablantes, and I I was ashamed. Like I was ashamed, and my previous Spanish instructor teacher, she called me into her class and asked me why I was that her, the other teacher, the AP teacher, told her that I didn't want to speak in class. That she told me my teacher told me, don't be ashamed of what you know. Don't be ashamed at how well you know the language and that you can speak it. That you should use that and not be ashamed of it. And I think ever since then, I kind of was like, you know what, she's right. Like, I was given this gift that I asked for, and now I'm afraid to use it, you know? So it was around senior year of high school that I really started speaking it, which is why my understanding of Spanish is a lot better than my spoken language. But I can communicate, I can express myself, but sometimes it's difficult. But I can get it, you know, like I don't really have a huge struggle with it. Sometimes I say things that I know is wrong, but I can't figure out the right way to say it at that moment, but I know that I'm saying it wrong. And as I think that as long as you're able to, the other person is able to understand you, that's the main point of learning for me, the language, is for me to be able to communicate and for them to understand me, not for me to be like 100% correct and not have an accent or sound 100% like a Spanish speaker or 100% like a Korean. For me, I really just love languages and to be able to communicate with other people on a pretty good level, you know? So, do I want to be 100% perfect? No. But would I like to? I mean, of course, everyone wants to be at their best, you know? But I mean, the main goal for me is to be able to communicate and have a good conversation with someone. So that was Spanish, and that's how Spanish came about. I have a big passion for Spanish, and I heard something. I think one of my students is outside my door. Okay, so I have a big passion for Spanish, and that's just like the heart of languages for me. Like Spanish is just right here, you know? And so that was the beginning. And then what's the next language that I started? Korean? I started learning Korean actually recently, and I think a year and a half ago or a year ago. I think a year and a half ago. Yeah, a year and a half ago I started learning Korean. The reason I started learning Korean was because I started, I was actually working at a gym, and I was reading a book, a Chinese book, and I was considering learning Chinese, so Mandarin, and so I started like looking up at this book, and this guy came in. He was Korean, and he's like, "Oh wow, you're learning Chinese?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm considering like picking it up, you know." And he goes, "Oh, it's really hard." And then I was like, "Yeah, I know." And when he came back out, he was like, "Oh, you know what? I realized." It was after his workout. He goes, "You know what? I realized I probably discouraged you from learning Chinese because I'm telling you it's hard." And he's like, "You can do it, you know, just practice and really study and you can do it. You know, I don't mean to discourage you." And I was like, "Oh, you didn't discourage me." But then I started looking into Korean. Like I started watching Korean dramas. That's how I started like learning it. It wasn't to learn a language. It was just to watch Korean dramas. And then when I was watching, I was just like, wow, this language is really beautiful, you know? To me, it's similar to Spanish, like the sound, like intonation kind of. And I don't know, I just think it's just really beautiful, a beautiful language. And so then I was like, you know what, I think I'd rather learn Korean. And so I started with the alphabet, and I was like, oh my gosh, the alphabet is so easy, you know? You can learn Korean, written Korean in a day. I am not playing with you guys. You can learn it, so just sit down right now, get a book, look on the internet, and study for like 2 or 3 hours, and trust me, you'll be able to read in like one day. So I looked into Korean language. It sounded amazing to me, and then to be able to read it was super easy. And now that I'm in Korea, I'm falling even more in love with the language. It's like so beautiful to me, and I can't say that it tops Spanish because obviously that was my first, second language. So, but I really like the Korean language, and um, I just think it's really beautiful. And I started learning American Sign Language, which is ASL, which you probably saw in my last video. I signed a song. I started learning it last year or the year before. I took 2 classes only, and I picked up the language really fast. I just loved it. The reason I started the class was, well, when I was younger, I learned the alphabet, but I didn't practice it. I didn't think about it. I just remembered a couple letters, and then I looked into it, and I was like, you know what? I really want to learn sign language, and so I started the classes, and then I started learning about the deaf culture, and it's just really fascinating to me about how, I don't know, I can't say, if I had to pick one language, I don't know which one I'd pick, but I think sign language is just such a beautiful language. Like, to be able to express yourself with your face, and your hands and your body language is very beautiful. And we do that with spoken language, but um, it's just completely different when you can do it with sign language. I can't really express it to you guys, but it's just so beautiful to me. And when I learned about, I'm still learning about deaf culture, and just everything about like the history of deaf culture, and just how it is still becoming, it's still a problem, like to try and get government and get a lot of society to understand that sign language is a language. It has syntax, it has everything that a language does. There's a specific order of ASL that you have to put the words in, and there are rules. So some people say, oh, sign language is not a language, and it is. It's a beautiful language, and if you actually sit down and learn it, and learn the history of deaf culture, and learn the structure of ASL, you'll realize that it's a language, and you use your facial expressions, you use body and everything, and I think that more people need to become educated about ASL, not just ASL, but Korean Sign Language. And yes, Korean Sign Language is actually different. It's just like if you go to France, there is a different sign language, there's a different spoken language, just as there's a different sign language. So every area has their own sign language. So my mentor teacher asked me if I wanted to learn Korean Sign Language, and I told her yes. So that might be my 5th language. But I do have a passion for languages, and I think it stemmed definitely from my childhood and being surrounded by people. I've always grown up around people who are not like me. So living in Korea is easy for me because I've always been surrounded by people who are different than me. So it's just a whole nother culture. So I have a long history with languages, and it's not the end. At first, maybe 2 years ago, I was like, this is it. This is when I started learning Korean. I was like, oh, that's it. I'm not gonna. It's English, Spanish, and Korean. That's it. And then I was like, oh no, English, Spanish, Korean, and Sign Language. And now I'm like, no, English, Spanish, Korean, Sign Language, ASL, and Korean Sign Language. And then now I'm kind of thinking about picking up maybe another language. I don't know. I started learning Japanese a year ago, 2 years ago, a year and a half. I don't know. And I took 1 class, and I started mixing Korean and Japanese together in my thoughts. So I was like, no, you know what? I think I'm going to put Japanese on hold, or I'm not going to learn it. I really, of all the Asian languages, I just really love Korean. So yeah, but I might pick up Japanese again, but I'm not sure. Definitely on my next list is Korean Sign Language, and I've seen a couple of Koreans doing sign language, so and I really wanted to speak with them, but I was kind of like, oh, like I don't speak enough Korean, let alone Korean Sign Language, so it would be very confusing. And so also there are like words in American Sign Language that they have in their sign language, but are completely different. So I don't want to sign the wrong thing, but not that they'd make a big deal about it, but so does my language learning stop here at these languages? No, because I think that you should always challenge yourself. I have a big desire to become fluent in Korean, Spanish, and well, Spanish of course, and sign language, and whatever other language that God allows me to learn or that I challenge myself. I can't just say that I can pray and ask God to let me learn a language, and if I'm not studying it, I think I need to do my part too. So yeah, that's my history with languages and my language story. I really don't know what I'm going to do with all the languages, but I know that it's a passion of mine, and if it's a passion, you don't really need a reason for learning it other than that. So yeah, so that's my language story. If you guys have a language story, comment below or send me a video response. Thank you guys for asking questions and stuff. Feel free to continue messaging or commenting, and I'll try and do video responses as much as possible. So I'll see you guys later. Bye.